Imagine leaving your home, your family, and everything you have ever known to cross a terrifying and endless ocean, only to step off the boat and find yourself completely abandoned at the edge of the world. There is no wind today. There is no sound. The year is 1590. The place is a small, isolated strip of land off the coast of North America, known as Roanoke Island. When Governor John White finally stepped off his ship and waded through the shallow, cold waters onto the shores of the colony he had left behind 3 years ago, he expected to hear the laughter of children. He expected to see the smoke from cooking fires. He expected to embrace his daughter and hold his young granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the very first English child born in this strange new world. But as he walked up the muddy bank and pushed through the dense, overgrown brush, he saw nothing. No smoke, no people, no bodies. 115 men, women, and children, completely gone, vanished into the heavy, humid air as if they had never existed at all. He called out their names. His voice echoed against the dark, imposing trees of the ancient American forest, but the only answer was the cold, hollow sound of the ocean wind. This is not a myth. This is not a campfire ghost story invented to scare children in the dark. This is the very real, heavily documented, and deeply disturbing historical event known as the Lost Colony of Roanoke, the oldest, most chilling, unsolved mystery in American history. For over 4 centuries, the greatest historians, forensic scientists, and modern archaeologists have desperately tried to piece together what happened on that island. Did they starve to death in the brutal, unforgiving winter? Were they massacred by a hidden enemy in the dead of night? Or did something far more terrifying happen to them out there in the dark woods? To understand the sheer terror of this disappearance, we have to go back to exactly how this nightmare began. In 1587, the English Empire was obsessed with conquering the New World. They wanted a permanent settlement. They sent a brave, perhaps foolish group of families to establish a foothold on Roanoke Island. But from the very moment their boots hit the sand, the colony was doomed. The supplies were running dangerously low. The local indigenous tribes, who had been brutally attacked by previous English explorers, were deeply hostile. And winter, the freezing, merciless winter, was rapidly approaching. Governor John White knew that if they stayed isolated without food, every single man, woman, and infant would die a slow, agonizing death. So he made a heartbreaking decision. He would leave his family behind, sail back across the treacherous Atlantic Ocean to England, gather massive ships full of food, weapons, and medicine, and return immediately to save them. He promised his daughter he would be back in a few short months, but fate is incredibly cruel. When John White arrived in England, a massive war had broken out. The legendary Spanish Armada was attacking. Queen Elizabeth ordered that every single ship in the country be seized for the war effort. No one was allowed to leave. John White was trapped. For 3 agonizing years, he sat in England, staring out at the ocean, knowing his family was starving, freezing, and waiting for a father who was not coming. When the war finally ended, and he finally managed to secure a ship back to America in 1590, the dread in his stomach was unbearable. As his ship approached the island in the dead of night, they saw a massive fire burning in the woods. White's heart leaped with hope. They were alive. They had a fire. He ordered his men to play English folk songs loudly on their trumpets, sending a musical signal into the dark forest to let his family know that salvation had finally arrived. But there was no answer. When morning broke, they rowed to the shore. What they found, it made absolutely no sense. The settlement was completely dismantled, not destroyed, not burned to the ground in a violent raid. Dismantled. The houses had been carefully taken apart. Heavy chests of belongings had been dug up from the dirt, their contents smashed and scattered across the mud by scavengers. And then, John White saw it. Carved deeply and deliberately into a massive wooden post of the fort's defensive fence was a single terrifying word: Croatoan. Croatoan. There was no cross carved above it. Before White had left 3 years prior, he had made a strict life-or-death agreement with the colonists. If they were forced to flee the island due to a sudden attack or impending doom, they were to carve a secret message into a tree. And if they were in extreme danger, They were to carve a Maltese cross above the letters. But there was no cross. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, located about 50 miles to the south, inhabited by a friendly Native American tribe. It seemed like a clear message. They had moved. They had packed up their homes and relocated to survive. Desperate and filled with a sudden surge of terrifying hope, White ordered his men to set sail for Croatoan Island immediately, but the ocean refused to let them go. A massive, violent hurricane suddenly formed off the coast. The skies turned black. The waves smashed against the wooden hull of their ship, breaking their anchor cables and nearly sinking the vessel. The crew, terrified for their lives, absolutely refused to go any further. They forced John White to turn back. They forced him to sail back to England. He never saw his daughter again. He never saw his granddaughter again. He died alone, broken, and haunted by the ghost of the word carved into the wood. But the mystery was just beginning. What actually happened to the 115 souls of Roanoke? For hundreds of years, the most popular theory was the assimilation theory. Historians desperately wanted a happy ending. They believed that the starving colonists, abandoned by their empire, simply walked to the nearby native tribes, begged for help, and integrated into their society. And there is some haunting evidence to support this. Decades later, when new European explorers ventured into the deep forests of North Carolina, they reported something chilling. They encountered Native American tribes with blonde hair and striking blue eyes. Even more bizarre, some of the indigenous people spoke perfect Elizabethan English. They told stories passed down from their ancestors, claiming that their forefathers talked out of a book. In recent years, modern geneticists have rushed to the area, running complex DNA tests on the modern descendants of the Croatoan tribe. The results were startling. There are definitive, undeniable genetic links to ancient European DNA mixed deeply within the tribal bloodlines. It seems peaceful. It seems logical. But modern forensic evidence tells a much darker story. You see, human beings do not just peacefully pack up an entire heavily fortified colony and walk 50 miles through hostile, dense, predator-filled swamps without leaving a single trace. Archaeologists digging into the deep soil around Roanoke have recently uncovered something terrifying. Hidden beneath the dirt, they found massive unmarked mass graves from the era. They found shattered English pottery mixed with indigenous arrowheads. This points directly to the massacre theory. In the late 1500s, the Spanish Empire was ruthlessly patrolling the American coast, looking to slaughter any English settlers they could find. We know from declassified Spanish maritime logs that they were actively searching for Roanoke. Did the Spanish find them in the dead of night? Did heavily armed soldiers storm the beach, slaughtering the men in their sleep and dragging the women and children onto ships to be sold into slavery? If so, who carved the word into the tree? Was it a desperate, bloody message left by the last survivor before a Spanish blade silenced them forever? Or perhaps the threat was much closer to home. Chief Powhatan, the incredibly powerful and brutal leader of the massive indigenous empire that surrounded the area, later confessed to an English captain that he personally ordered the complete and total slaughter of the Roanoke colonists. He claimed they had allied themselves with a rival tribe, so he sent his most vicious warriors to wipe them off the face of the earth. He even produced English muskets and iron tools to prove he had taken their belongings. But if they were violently massacred, where are the bones? 115 human skeletons do not simply dissolve into the sand. Even after 400 years, modern ground-penetrating radar should be able to detect the calcium deposits of a mass grave of that size on the island. But there is nothing. The ground is completely, unnervingly empty, which leads us to the most controversial, bizarre, and terrifying evidence ever discovered in this case: the Dare Stones. In 1937, a tourist walking through a dark, remote swamp deep in the woods of North Carolina accidentally tripped over a massive, heavy quartz stone. When he brushed the mud away, he realized the rock was entirely covered in deeply etched, frantic handwriting. It was signed by Eleanor Dare, the daughter of John White. The message carved into the stone was a horrifying letter addressed to her father. It claimed that after he left, the colony was ravaged by a terrifying illness. People began dying in agony, their skin turning black. Desperate, the survivors fled the island and walked deep into the dark mainland forest. But there, they were hunted. The stone claims that native warriors stalked them through the trees. It describes a brutal, bloody massacre. Eleanor wrote that her husband and her beautiful young daughter, Virginia Dare, were murdered right in front of her eyes. She carved the stone as her final act before she, too, expected to be killed. When this stone was found, the world went absolutely crazy. Was this the final tragic answer? Over the next few years, nearly 40 more stones were miraculously discovered scattered across the wilderness, detailing a vast, epic journey of Eleanor surviving and moving further into the mountains. But soon the dark reality of human greed set in. Historians closely examined the later stones and realized the spelling was wrong. The tools used to carve them were modern. They were elaborate, sick fakes created by locals looking to make a quick profit from the massive media attention. Because of the fake stones, the original horrifying first stone was immediately thrown out and labeled a hoax. But here is the terrifying twist. Modern linguistic experts and forensic geologists have recently re-examined that very first stone using technology that did not exist in the 1930s. The chemical weathering on the carvings is incredibly ancient. The highly specific, bizarre Elizabethan spelling of the words matches John White's personal diaries perfectly. Diaries that were locked in a vault in England and impossible for a random tourist in 1937 to know about. Many top-tier historians now quietly believe the first Dare stone is real. And if it is real, it means Eleanor Dare watched her family get slaughtered in the mud, carved her final desperate scream into a rock, and died completely alone in the dark. But even with DNA, ancient stones, and historical logs, there is a deeper, much more unsettling theory that whispers through the trees of North Carolina. The locals who have lived on that coast for generations do not believe it was the Spanish. They do not believe it was starvation. They believe in the dark folklore of the Croatoan entity. In ancient Algonquian legends, Croatoan was not just an island. It was the name of a dark, supernatural spirit of the forest, a massive, shape-shifting entity that demanded human sacrifice. According to the oldest, darkest rumors passed down in the isolated local towns, the starving English settlers, driven to absolute madness by hunger and freezing cold, turned away from their god. They walked into the deep woods and offered themselves to the entity of the forest in exchange for survival. The legend says the entity accepted their offering and absorbed them, turning their bodies into the very trees, the soil, and the fog that rolls off the ocean. They say that is why there are no bones. They say that is why the colony was perfectly dismantled. And they say that when John White found that word carved into the post, it was not a map. It was a warning, a declaration that the settlers belonged to the forest now. To this day, the woods around the Roanoke site are notoriously silent. The local wildlife avoids the specific area where the fort used to stand. If you walk out into the deep brush of Roanoke Island as the sun goes down and the heavy ocean fog begins to roll in, you can feel it. You can feel the overwhelming, suffocating weight of over 100 people watching you from the shadows. The American government has heavily restricted archaeological digging in certain protected areas of the island. They claim it is to preserve the natural environment. But others wonder, what exactly are they trying to keep buried? Every year, modern storms and hurricanes wash away more and more of the island's coastline. The ocean is slowly swallowing the last remaining physical dirt of the original colony. Within our lifetime, the exact spot where John White fell to his knees in the mud and realized his family was gone will be completely erased from the face of the earth. And the 115 men, women, and children of the Roanoke colony will remain what they have been for over 400 years. Ghosts, trapped forever in the dark pages of history. A terrifying reminder that no matter how advanced we think we are, no matter how powerful our empires become, the dark, unexplored corners of this world can still swallow us whole and leave absolutely nothing behind but a single word carved in the wood.